Nothing angers Dr. Dealer more than hearing about a good and benevolent soul who he then discovers is using that position of power or trust to misuse that role and abuse those that he sees as vulnerable. Usually when faced with such a person and all evidence irrefutably exposing their guilt, the doctor's justice is swift, unlike the inevitable death the abuser faces. Bathsheba ensures that the punishment fits the crime. The doctor, however, is only human. He may have sold his soul to the managing director of hell many years ago, but while he lives and breathes on this earth, he can sometimes succumb to charm and various refreshments and, in this case, to the promise of a man of God who convinced Dealer that all was well in his town. He actually insisted that the doctor and his companions check that nothing was amiss. The snake oil salesman could sell his wares, partake of all aspects of hospitality, and then be on his way. Everyone had a good time, and a hazy exit ensued. Several days pass, and while many miles out of that previously welcoming town, a lone rider is spotted in the distance, coming from the glare of the summer sun. The horse gallops towards the brightly lit emporium and collapses as it reaches Dr. Dealer's travelling wagons. Several of the doctor's compatriots rush to the dying animal to see a child trapped underneath. Gasping for air and water, the youngster is pulled from underneath the dying horse, given necessary aid and brought to Dr. Dealer. Only able to speak sporadically, the juvenile still manages to describe how the man of God in the village that the Emporium had just spent time in a few days before had, the day after the Emporium's departure, gathered all the children to the town's church with the promise of treats if they came to worship God. Unusually bolting the door of the church from the inside just before the service, the clergyman stood in the pulpit and decreed that all the children in front of him had betrayed him by inviting Dr. Dealer to his treasured congregation, a congregation that he was, in his own disgusting way, regularly taken advantage of. He didn't know that Dr. Dealer had, in actual fact, just travelled to his ward by chance. The clergyman lifted the holy chalice, usually holding the communal wine, threw it around his audience and knocked over a huge candle which ignited the flammable fuel that he had put there instead of the wine, setting the church alight and aiming with his brutal insanity to cleanse his parish in order that he could rebuild his power base and continue his disguised abuse. As the church was engulfed in flames, the mad priest crashed through a high window, inaccessible to the poor children inside, crying out to the parents that a horrific accident had taken place. They shouldn't try to risk their own lives. All hope was gone. And while they were alive, there was always the chance that, God willing, new life could replace those cruelly lost in this tragedy. Except he didn't see through the flames and smoke that one young boy had followed his route to safety, a child now aware of the mad priest's motives, and instead of making his own survival apparent, he ran choking to the nearest horse, onto which he climbed and followed the tracks out of town towards Dr. Dealer's Emporium, where he knew that without the evil priest's influence, his version of events would be believed. Dr. Dealer is now incensed, not just because of the loss of life that the young witness has described, but also how he was bluffed into thinking that all was well in an environment which had all the makings of a situation that normally he and Bathsheba would thrive in. There were no afflicted children in that town, no parents cruelly abusing their offspring, just people being lulled into a false sense of security by a man promising them the world, and he has now become the one that got away. Needless to say, the Emporium does an immediate about turn and makes its way back to the previous town, angrier than ever, more determined for justice than ever, learning by a massive mistake. It will never happen again. This man might well be the one who got away. But there are 2 days involved in making their way back to his parish, and that's 2 days on the road for them to invent all new forms of wonderful torture and pain that the one that got away will not find in any way pleasant. Lessons here have been learned.